Hi there all, and welcome to my first modern game review. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Last Stand Dead Zone, which is a video game that was released on Facebook, Unrated, and Congregate in 2012. It was also later released on Yahoo Games in March of 2014. The gameplay footage you are seeing here is the Facebook version. This is a 3D isometric online zombie horror game mixed with tactical RPG elements, and it is the fourth game of the Last Stand series, developed by Con Artist Games and published by Arler Game Studios. It is also an indirect sequel to the previous game called The Last Stand Union City, and this game takes place more than 3 years after the zombie outbreak in Union City. Now, before we can begin with the review, I just want to ask you all about The Last Stand Dead Zone. Is this game really good as some people claimed it to be? Is it also a bad game others have originally thought so forth? Or did this game hold up well over the years? Well, let's go ahead, survive, build a compound, and scavenge our way straight into this post-apocalyptic zombie world, either together or, for reasons unknown, against one another. The graphics in The Last Stand Dead Zone is a massive improvement over the previous 3 games. Although, to be fair, the colors still look a little too muted for my taste. Also, the game's environment looks way too gritty and post-apocalyptic from a visual standpoint. Despite acting negative towards the game's muted colors, it is part of the charm after all, due to its setting taking place in a post-apocalyptic zombie-infested world. And it's an interesting feeling to have a dark, gritty atmosphere for a zombie apocalyptic game. Character animations do look way better and more natural than their predecessors. Of course, let's not forget how to start this game, from the very beginning, in a broad way. For example, at the first start of the game, you begin alone in your compound as the leader, and over time, you must grow your compound by attracting up to 10 survivors by doing multiple yet simple enough tasks, which is how it works. Also, you must build up strong defenses against both hordes of zombies and attacks from other survivors, i.e. human players. There are no AI survivors randomly attacking your compound, which is unfortunate to say the least, but I digress. Anyway, in this game, you have a HUD that shows you what you need for your compound. On the upper center corner of the HUD, you have the leader's name, aka the player's name, a moral rating for the entire compound, compound security rating, compound comfort rating, an assigned defensive position for a certain number of survivors, a compound progress report, and the amount of fuel you have for your compound. There are settings to change your game. In the game section, there is an options menu for general, video, audio, and flash player. In the general options, you can turn on or off gore, bullet tracers, and inventory clothing preview. Next, in the video options, you can change the graphics settings. Then in the audio options, you can change the volume settings. Finally, there's the flash player. The game's options are nice and simple to read, which is good to say the least. Anyway, below the leader's name, there are 4 look slots and 1 manual slot. On the left corner of the HUD, there are 6 resources you can find for your compound, which are wood, metal, cloth, food, water, and ammo. There are 6 resources that can be scavenged from player-based missions, traded with, picked up from drop-offs, and or taken from other survivors across the map of Union City and its outskirts. On the bottom center of the HUD, you have the store, construction, inventory, crafting, research, alliances, bounty office, objectives, survivors, and the city map. Now, granted, the HUD can get a little glitchy sometimes, but I'm actually quite impressed with how well organized and easily readable the UI is. So, kudos to the dev team for making it nicely done, and not getting too much of that in your face, of course. Anyway, fuel can be scavenged around the abandoned Union City, and of course opened in random different boxes with level 1, 2, and 3 key cards that you must pay with fuel, which is a nice way of buying them. Fuel can also be bought with money, but we'll get to that later. In this game, you start by creating your first survivor, a leader who can level up by gaining experience points, which is fine for the most part, except that you'll lose the chance of getting your other survivors' levels to increase rapidly. My best advice is to let the other survivors' experience points keep up with your leaders, otherwise they'll fall behind in their fighting prowess against zombies, AI Herc soldiers, and human raiding parties. The best part of the game is that you don't have to fight zombies indefinitely while on real-time missions scavenging for items such as weapons, gear, and components. There is a scavenged items number feature on the upper left corner of the screen for manual player-based missions that was later updated during the game's 4th year run, which is a nice thing to add. I find this feature far better than just blindly running around on these types of missions searching all of the containers and boxes every single time, while taking the survivors to faraway places from the compound for prolonged periods of time. It is really helpful to everyone, and I greatly appreciate the developers for implementing this feature. A good part of the game is that there are 31 construction sets not needed for level requirements. They also require no food, which is another good thing. Another good part of the Last Stand Dead Zone is that you can find around 10 to 40 fuel from a few missions every 12 to 14 hours. Or maybe it was 24 hours, I'm not sure. Anyway, which is super helpful and nice for a lot of things in your compound. For many examples, like trading, researching, repairing, crafting, and in case of emergencies, speeding up travel time, and so on, or etc., I should say. I digress. There's a car, and you can upgrade it. Although expensive, you can upgrade the Deathmobile car, which is what it's called in the game, for about $30 once, which will greatly help reduce all mission return times to 5 minutes for manual missions and 10 minutes for automated missions. PvP raids will not be affected by this upgrade, and it will always take 2 hours for the survivors to return, which is kind of sad, but it's probably for the best and necessary to avoid any raid exploitation from any online players. Unless you want to waste a lot of fuel with it, then, well, good luck with that. But overall, a great feature for having a upgraded Deathmobile car, of course. And I think it's a good way to spend on it. Alrighty then, let's move on to another good aspects of the game. Anyway, a neat portion of the Last Stand Dead Zone is that there's an option called raiding practice that allows players to practice and simulate a raid on their compound without any serious consequences or return times. No ammunition or active gear is used up, and the defenders are clones of the player's survivors, which means you don't have to worry about getting injuries or damage to any buildings and, themselves. Traps have the option to be armed or disarmed, and if traps are armed and triggered, they don't need to be repaired, which is awesome for raiding practice. Scavenging is disabled, of course, which is a little disappointing, but I don't mind about it at all. I find this raiding practice very useful for both defensive and offensive capabilities against other players. In case you want to raid them or not, just be careful you're going to raid, though, just fair warning. Anyway, some of the maps are well designed for, let's say, a few examples, like large parks, small streets, small warehouses, hardware stores of any size, and of course, gun stores. Anyway, let's talk about the bounty office. In the bounty office section, there are 2 bounty systems. The first one is called Infected Bounties, which involves killing different types of zombies in any number at 3 selected areas. The second one is called Survivor Bounties, and it's a reward system in which you place a bounty price of 10 to 100 fuel on players who raided you, regardless of what they've done to your compound, whether it was successful or not. I find it a little annoying whenever I get some kind of bounty out of nowhere for no apparent reason, even during, let's say, a lore round. But it doesn't matter for getting it anyway. I mean, it's not a bad feature by any stretch of the imagination, but it is an interestingly good enough idea nonetheless, since all the bounties are set to expire within days to weeks, rather than lasting a very, very long time, or forever. Unless you're some kind of constant raider who likes to get bountied a lot for some silly reasons. But I digress. As for the alliances section, you can create an alliance for 1,000 fuel and have the option to disband it at will, which is fine for the most part, so long as you're not wasting away lots of fuel for recreating one over and over again. You can also join alliances for free, which is great for many good reasons, such as not having enough fuel to create one yourself, or just for fun in general. Anyway, there's a good reward system for the biggest top 3 alliances, where you can earn lots of fuel by raiding players' flags of different alliances and going on annual missions to scavenge off the loot for points. Alliances that made it to the top 3 are the ones earning the fuel, which will be divided up among the first 10 team members after the lore round is over. If an alliance is created or a new member comes to join during the lore round, you'll be stuck in an enlisted mode without the chance to get involved until the start of the next one. It's a pretty cool feature, and I had a lot of fun being part of it with several alliances, but I'm not gonna go into details on which of them I joined since there are so many of them, even if I wanted to for the sake of examples. Anyway, that's all I can say about the alliances section, and now let's move on to the next aspects of the game. Okay then, now let's move on to the next aspects of the game. The sound effects look pretty spotty at times, for example, the weapons. And to further add to the example, the weapons are sometimes pretty loud and punchy. For a few examples, like sniper rifles, assault rifles, pistols, and shotguns, while others sound a little weak. For several examples, SMGs, light machine guns, and weirdly enough, silenced weapons. It's true that silenced weapons are meant to be quiet, but they need to sound more steamy and not some weird low volume pew pew sounds, which kind of annoys me like so many times. The grenades are no different, although they do startle me a bit when they go off. Especially the mines too, of course. Anyway, there are objectives that you can do to earn experience points, find fuel, and or good items, which is a nice idea, but can get a tad bit more tedious over time, and sometimes infuriating for some when you're trying to get things done due to possible or more likely cases experiencing performance issues, which might happen depending on what kind of PC you have. But I'll talk about it in just a moment. In the meantime, let's focus on the rest of the mixed aspects of the game. Anyway, you can still see that there's quite a considerable number of bugs, lag, and input delay on my playthroughs. For example, most small and medium-sized maps are less capable of experiencing lag than others, but it can still occur when too many zombies show up all at once on one screen, and the input would eventually happen while this goes on. Of course, let's not forget what kind of PC I currently use right now to play The Last Stand Dead Zone. I play this game using a Windows 10 Pro Dell laptop computer, which runs on an i5-8350 computer processor from 1.70 gigahertz to 1.9 gigahertz. It also runs on 16 gigabytes of RAM and uses a 64-bit operating system. This PC that I'm currently running is a lot more powerful than my old Windows 7 HP laptop computer, which ran on AMD Turing TM and 530 dual-core processor at 2.5 gigahertz, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and a 64-bit operating system. but it's still not enough to deal with some of the performance issues on my new PC that keep popping up more times than I can count, even after the new upgrade. I might get a new laptop or build a powerful gaming PC sometime in the future, but we'll have to wait and see. Alrighty then, let's move on to the juicier stuff. There's an interesting and unique raid called the Raid on Union Island, which you can participate by going on to 3 different missions. The first mission of the Raid on Union Island is a bridge level. Next, the second mission is set in the middle of a monument. And finally, the third and final mission is set inside a military-like encampment. You must fight not only zombies on each of those maps, but humans too, from an organization known as HUD, which is short for Homeland Environmental Risk Control. It is a fictional government organization, and it is considered an antagonist faction against the survivors in this game. It's a pretty good player-based mod, and it's very challenging at levels 50 through 56 for the most part. Although it does become way too easy once you've maxed out all your survivors, and players will begin to have really powerful weapons and gears over time. All raids are set to refresh every 23 hours, which is no biggie. The raid on Union Island is a good idea and somewhat challenging, but it can become way too easy once you've maxed out everything, thus becoming nothing more than a cheap gimmick. The things I get from the elite, rare, and unique boxes are a mixed bag though, even if some turned out to be good. For example, getting a set of armor gear with powerful specs, or an impressively powerful and unique sniper rifle at level 50 or higher. There's a system called the dice roll, which helps the player find any rare and or unique weapons and or gears by rolling a chance algorithm by going through a few missions. The dice roll is a neat idea, and it's a welcoming feature added into the game, which means we can understand it much better than the percent chance value of finding rare or unique weapons and gears. But unfortunately, it still needs a lot more work to be done as to whether or not how many rare or unique items and gear you can get per given day. I'm still not sure whether it's every day or every other day, but hopefully we'll get to find out more about it throughout the game's run. Now then, let's talk more about the 31 construction sets once again, since I've done something a little too positive in the broad sense early in my review. Anyway, my main concern is that every single one of them has a level 5 or higher requirement for construction. It's a nice idea at first, but once you get down to the number of resources needed for these 31 construction sets, you'll realize right away that the resource requirements on them are way too high, and what's worse is that they will hinder your progress of doing something more important to do, such as, looking for powerful weapons or good gear, or in other reasons, incredibly rare components for traps. The good news still is that no fuel is required for any of them. Most of the construction set upgrades take way too long to upgrade in levels 5 or more, and a lot a lot of times it takes way too many resources to use up, and you will end up having to go find more items and missions or buy more resource components from the store, which I find it both a good thing and pretty bad. It's a good thing that you can buy them with fuel. It's a bad thing due to its high waste of fuel. Anyway, enough of my rant on the construction set upgrade restrictions. Let's move on to the recycler. The recycler is a nice construction set, although it takes way too long to recycle items in large numbers in the machine. Trying to upgrade the recycler is very slow, unless you want to use a considerable amount of fuel to speed up the upgrade process, which frankly I wouldn't recommend doing it anyway, since it would take way too long to get it all done. Perhaps weeks or months to get all the lost fuel back through many missions, boxes, and or real-world money just by trying to speed up the unnecessarily long recycling process of placing too many items in the recycler. It's a good idea to play smart with it to the best of your ability. Okay, on to the research bench. The research bench is a nice addition to an already boring zombie game, but some of the upgrades are damn near useless. For example, comfort and all of the security research except for infected management. Also, the building material capacity is just not worth it. Oh yeah, all the traps except trap damage and ballistic trap duration are straight up useless for some utterly baffling reason. But I digress, and time to move on to the next aspect of the game. Anyway, I do find randomized mission maps as both good and bad sometimes. It's sometimes bad that you don't know where you're going in some randomized maps. For example, or I should say at least two examples, the design changes of the highways and suburban streets, which will inadvertently take forever for many players to finish finding all the loot until the last minute, or worse, the timer runs out before getting the last few of the containers that are really hard to find. Sometimes it's a good thing that you already know where you're going in some of these randomized mission maps on your first try or two. For a couple of examples, the good randomized designs of gun stores and streets. Although it's not a good thing to have these locations randomized, it does add a lot of replay value, some good variety, and sometimes enjoyable playthroughs to experience with. Alrighty then, let's move on to my views about the chat room. Public chat is actually okay for the most part, although sometimes it can get kind of ugly during certain days. For example, on occasion, some people are on different alliances would show up and become pretty negative towards other groups of people, including different alliance members. Other than that, most people are really friendly in public chat. Some like to talk about their life experiences, can share and or trade items, and mostly relay important information on current events. Alliance chat is mostly fine, but can get incredibly annoying later on once people start to spam invites all over the place just to incite players to join their alliances for no apparent reason other than being actively desperate toward everyone, including myself. There's indeed voice acting in this game, usually for your survivors, and it's fine, for the most part, but it's mostly hit or miss. Anyway, that's all I can say about my mixed feelings toward the game, so let's head over to the most negative aspects of the Last Stand Dead Zone. There's no in-game storyline, and the only story we got is some backstory in many different days after the infection in loading screens. It's an interesting set piece of lore within the game's world, but not exactly brilliant storytelling, and it can become quite tedious after seeing those same events over and over and over again, more than once or twice, while loading into the game. Every single time. There's a zombie boss called an Elite, which appears on level 20 or higher maps. The Elite Hunter zombie boss is an extremely annoying enemy with an insanely long health bar if you don't have any powerful weapons with you for the first time, or second, or third. If you do get any powerful unique weapons, they'll become less challenging than the last time you encountered them. But they're still irritatingly annoying enemies nonetheless. If you did manage to kill the Elite Hunter zombie boss, you'll either get a rare or a unique Elite haul. Some of the hauls will either give the player some fuel from time to time, and or infamous skulls/ears. I wouldn't bother encountering these types of enemies when your survivors are at the lowest levels and have terrible weapons to start with. So please avoid these plague-infested things at all costs until you're more than powerful enough to deal with them. Anyway, you have a limited inventory to start with if this is your first time playing this game, and it has to be watched over at all times when you're about to run low on item space. It also has to be lower than 90%, otherwise you won't be able to keep the necessary items you just looted in your recent missions. The worst part about this ordeal is that these extra slots upgrade prices for the inventory have changed from 500 through 1500 fuel to $10 through $29.90 in recent years. It's shamefully awful and selfishly greedy by the developer team, and I hated it. Some, or perhaps most of the mission maps are poorly designed with a bad state of randomization, and to add insult to injury, I'm gonna include many examples as to why these maps are horrible, as follows: large warehouses, large subway stations, small parks, train yards, train stations, small shopping strips, large shopping strips, highways, construction sites, forests, suburban blocks, suburban streets, sometimes, and unidentified buildings, for the most part. Anyway, the worst offender I find about this game is that some of these player-based missions don't give you enough time to scavenge all of the containers, and unfortunately, ending up losing a survivor due to running out of time trying to get to the exit quickly in such a large-scale map, or not with terrible pathfinding. Although I'm no big fan of auto missions, I do find them somewhat useful for getting some helpful items and equipment from time to time. A good option for auto missions is to have 2 or 3 survivors for going to these kinds of missions automatically instead of wasting away precious time and resources doing them manually. But I digress. The store is, or I should at least say, was an overpriced microtransaction dump meant to gouge out every player's wallet for the sake of greed. The worst offender is how overpriced the other items can be in terms of, let's say, fuel, for example, such as the conservationist book, which costs about 3,000 fuel. And oh boy, that's far too expensive for a single book. Ugh. And well, I find some other items such as hats, helmets, etc. costing a little too much money, past 99 cents. And they should have at least been a little cheaper, but unfortunately they should be avoided at all costs. Unless you're absolutely rich, and I guess that's fine, so long that it's worth something of value per individual, but I digress. As for buying fuel with money, it's not a good idea to buy them more than once since the bonuses for fuel are pretty mediocre at best. Even one that costs about $100 as a broad example. Anyway, there's a special player versus event mode called Terror Dome run by a guy named Liddy Hackett. Interesting name. And it's available for level 15 through 60 players. The mode must be paid with an entry fee, which is fuel, and only 3 armed survivors are allowed to enter the dome. There are 3 rounds, and you must earn 1,500 points each to get either the 3 prize halls, elite, rare, or unique. Points are earned by pressing every slow red and fast green button indefinitely until the 3-minute timer runs out, and having your survivors stay alive with lots of health. I don't like the Terror Dome because you have to pay a higher fuel fee per level to play this mode feature, and it's a big list of fuel to spend, and the prize haul is not very good regardless of what kinds of rewards you'll get if you scored at around 1,500 through 6,000 points. Don't even bother playing with this mode. It is a complete waste of time and pointless to play through. After only playing Terror Dome up to 3 times, the only good side of the Terror Dome is that you can play it multiple times per day without having to deal with a 23-hour waiting time, like in every other mission on the map, including the raid on Union Island. Other than that, avoid this PvE event at all costs, and go play better player-based missions instead. Especially the raid on Island, since the rewards in them are much better. Although, yeah, you still have to wait until level 50 to get to the raid on Union Island than the Terror Dome mode. Anyway, rant over on Terror Dome. And now let's talk about Trade Chat. Trade Chat is the worst. Sometimes some highly experienced veteran players will often take too much of an advantage on other less experienced players by selling stuff at inflated prices. Other times, some more experienced veteran players can be friendly by selling items at reasonable enough prices, but even then they can become quite hypocritical or get too desperate sometime during the later hours of the game. At one point I accidentally acted a little too desperate in trade chat before, and I hated doing that since it increases the likelihood of discouraging people from trading with players. It's tough to encourage players in this game to trade with, and I don't blame them. Also, I've noticed some people do blind trades, which happens to be a common occurrence. I find this practice a complete nuisance, and it gets extremely annoying super quick once you've found out how highly unprepared you are for what you're gonna get in return from these blind traders. So yeah, please be courteous to trade chat for the good of all traders this time around. Thank you very much. Anyway, there's another aspect of the game I hate, which is the Herc mine construction set. The reason why I hate the Herc mine construction set is the fact that you have to be at level 50 just to get it, which is way too ridiculously high to build. And unfortunately, it becomes damn near useless once you've researched all of the gear health in the research equipment section, leaving it a completely worthless piece of junk of a mine. Please avoid it at all costs, unless you're some hardcore player or something of a completionist. So yeah, whatever. Anyway, I digress. There's a construction set that I truly hate the most than all of the others, and it's called the Incinerator. The Incinerator is the most useless construction set ever to use, and what it does is that this machine lets you incinerate items that are removed from the inventory instantly with nothing in return. Sure, items added in the incinerator are destroyed without any time limits, which is great on paper, but it has a cost of 10 fuel, and it does nothing of value to your compound, so avoid using it at all costs. Now, granted, it's a nice idea, but what I don't like about the incinerator is the fact that it replaces the number of resources, including important components and or resources that you desperately needed to construct something and upgrade things or buildings for experience points. It changes those said important components and or resources for experience points instead, which is kinda fine if you want to upgrade your survivors faster. But it later becomes completely useless once you've maxed out all of your survivors in the game. Don't even bother using this waste of a machine. Ever. It's no good using the incinerator anyway. Unless you want to max out all 10 of your survivors levels super quick in the most arbitrarily dumb way possible. So yeah, whatever. Anyway, now let's head over to an even worse aspect of the game, which is in fact that it keeps crashing every 3 to 4 hours during my playthroughs every single time. I find it utterly abysmal just dealing with these crashes in my playthroughs of The Last Stand Dead Zone more than a few times, almost every day, and it pisses me off that it keeps happening like this all the time, even with an upgraded laptop computer. I'm not sure if this happens across all platforms or on other people's PCs, but let me know how it goes. Anyway, I think that it's time to close this review. In conclusion, despite playing The Last Stand Dead Zone for almost 6 years during this nearly 9-year run for both good and bad reasons, the game's true faults have finally begun to show up in the last 4 years or less, to a multitude of reasons. For instance, the continued lack of support in the last few years or less, along with some of the promised content that never got delivered, is then silently cancelled, causing the player base in this game to slowly plummet over time. Also, the continued number of bugs, glitches, and moderate to heavy amounts of lag that never got fixed ruined the game experience for me and everyone else. For some, to say the least, thus further diminishing the player base even more. These problems unfortunately changed my final score for The Last Stand Dead Zone from a decent 6 out of 10 to a disappointing 4 out of 10. Despite giving a disappointing final score towards The Last Stand Dead Zone, I quite actually enjoyed this game for a time, even though it isn't meant for some people, mostly due to that it's yet another zombie game, with some tactical RPG elements thrown into the mix, and not much else. It's still quite an enjoyable experience in some ways, and I don't blame you if you don't like it. For me though, I did kind of like The Last Stand Dead Zone when I first started to play the game back in 2014. Until it became increasingly boring for me over the next several years. Thus I immediately stopped playing it afterward. Until the last year and a half of its run on some occasions. Even though I came back to this game one last time, it had to come to an end, unfortunately. So by the end of this review, the game servers had already shut down on January 1st, 2021, and Last Stand Dead Zone is no longer available on all 4 websites. So as of right now, this is the last time you'll ever see the zombie game ever again, unless someone somehow brought it back to life from the dead grave side of games. Then by all means enjoy it whatever you like. As for me, I'm already done with this game, and I'm never gonna come back to it ever again. Anyway, thank you all for watching my review of The Last Stand Dead Zone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in future videos. Take care!